Hello and welcome to Google Apps Unscripted. My name is Eric Kalita.
And I'm Dan Lazen.
And we're from the Google AppScript Developer Relations team here with another edition of our show where we are unscripted and we basically just cover kind of recent news and events in the Google AppScript world, show you some cool stuff you might not have known about, and then answer questions live from the audience via Google Hangout. So if you are watching us live on YouTube, if you head over to the Google developers.google.com/live page, you'll can see a link at the top that says join the Hangout. Come on in, ask some questions, and we'll have a good time. All right, so we got some news to cover first before we get to questions. One of the big things is just yesterday, me and Dan pushed the giant red button to launch some new documentation or a refresh of our documentation. So you can find our documentation, as always, on developers.google.com/apps-script. And if you could take a look here at the screen, you'll see that there's a lot of changes that have come through in this recent documentation change. So, one of the big ones is our homepage got completely redesigned. Dan here did a great job of the design work, and you can see that it's much more inviting. But separate from just being a better looking design, it really helps people get to the content they need faster, right, Dan?
Yeah. I think it's there actually will probably be some people who are watching us in the future on this page right now, because if you scroll down to the bottom of the page there, you'll see one of the things we brought in is recent release notes and a playlist of all of our AppScript Google Developers Live episodes, just like this one. So it's possible that we're inside this page right now, sort of very meta, pointing over at the release notes, pointing up at the new design.
Yeah, so this is great. Yeah, I mean,
it's blowing my mind.
Getting the video there, getting the release notes, that really helps you get up some information up front. But I also really love these buttons to jump right into quick starts and tutorials.
Yeah.
A lot of people come to our documentation and they want to just get started. They don't want to spend a lot of time reading a book. They want to start coding right away. They want to do something interesting. And I feel like these 4 little buttons you got here really help direct users in that direction.
Yeah, and I think we allow for a lot of different ways for people to get engaged with AppScript. For one, as we talked about, there's the videos right on the page. There's a sort of sense that that AppScript is a continually developing product by the frequently updated release notes there. We've got these quick start tutorials that Eric was talking about, and some more intermediate tutorials that experienced developers will be quite comfortable jumping into straight away. And then for people who really just want to start coding and get used to the autocomplete and sort of see what kinds of methods they can drill down to within each of our sort of primary classes, that Start Scripting button right at the top of the page just pops open the script editor, and
away you go.
Away you go.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, some people, even the tutorial, they're like, get out of my way. They just want to start typing code as fast as possible. We give people that option right there. So,
and I think one of the other great things, if you take a look at the sidebar off to the left, the sort of main navigation. We've reorganized this. It's got all the same content as before, with an exception that we'll talk about in a moment. But it organizes them in a way that I think sort of represents the progression that people take through learning AppScript. We start out with some quick start guides, get into some of those intermediate tutorials, and then once you feel like you sort of found your feet, if you start reading this guide section, you'll find deeper sort of information on each of the major services, best practices, that kind of thing. And then once you're really flying and you just want the reference day-to-day, that reference section that breaks out sort of our major services into 3 categories, allows you to look up all of the sort of just straight API documentation and get straight to coding.
Yeah, that's something new here, is that before we kind of had all of our services for the most part lumped into one big category.
Yeah.
The list was long, it was hard to know what did what. Now, this first section of Google App Services, these are kind of like your core powerhouse services. These are the things that allow you to deeply integrate with Google Apps, pull data out, put data in. Those are really kind of like why you come to Google AppScript a lot of times.
Yeah.
And then these other guys here, advanced services, these are some services that have a kind of a different way that we integrate with, a little bit more for advanced users. And then script services, these are all the tools you need to build scripts, right? Not the end goal, but the tools.
Yeah.
So I really like that new structure as well. And while we're talking about reference documentation, we also, as part of this launch, did a complete overhaul of the generated reference documentation that we have.
This is the least flashy change here, but probably the single most important thing. I mean, you'll look at this front page from time to time, but you'll be looking at this stuff constantly.
Yeah, that's true. I spend most of my time, even as an experienced AppScript user, constantly referring back to these docs. What is the parameters? What do they mean? What do they do? And so we've done some changes. One is that the documentation that we're presenting to you is different. We've gone through, added a lot of new samples, clarified some language, put in some limitations. So it's really a bit more robust and complete. And the second thing is we did a little organization change to the left nav here as well, deeper in.
Yeah. Now you'll see what we call sort of the entry point, like the class that you use to access the rest of the service is always the very first thing in the category. There are a few services that have multiple entry points, but anyway, they're always sort of right to the top. So you know that when you're going to use Maps, you're going to start with this Maps link at the top. Then below that, you get the subclasses of Maps that allow you to access the different Maps objects, and all the methods that belong to them are kind of contained within them. And then the sort of lesser children, the cousins maybe, are classed as interfaces or enums below the classes section.
Yeah, so it's kind of organized top to bottom in kind of like what things are you most likely to refer to, right? You're probably going to really want to refer to the maps top level a lot, then maybe the classes to kind of some information, and then enums and interfaces less often. You're going to want to go down there and poke around. So it's really a good way to kind of, once again, take what is often a very large bit of documentation that we have and make it a bit easier to digest.
And apologies to those people who, for the first few days, are going to be a little bit concerned or confused about where to find the things they used to find. We know that changes are always disruptive, but we think in the long term this will provide a better experience for you, certainly a better experience for new users, and really help grow the Google Apps Script community.
It's great. Yeah, I'm really excited about these changes, and I'm hoping everybody else is enjoying them as much. So let's talk about some other things that have happened since the last Apps Unscripted. So a little bit of other news is you might have seen a blog post that went out on the Google developers blog in general, but also on our own blog about how we're retiring a few AppScript components. So there's going to be a few small pieces of the UI service, UI app as it's sometimes known, a few little pieces that either never worked correctly or that just have better replacements. Those are being kind of deprecated and then eventually sunset. And I guess the bigger news of it is the GUI builder. If you haven't used it before, it was kind of the drag and drop way to build user interfaces. It wasn't quite complete. It didn't have all the widgets, and we just thought that it wasn't really servicing as an important need. And we just had better ways to build UIs now, especially with the launch of HTML service. So go to our blog. You can check out this blog post for more information. And there's a sunsets page in our documentation that talks about when these will go away.
Yeah. Basically, you've got 6 months from a few weeks ago, so I think mid-September is when these guys are getting turned off. Depending on which component we're talking about, they'll either cease to function entirely in September or still remain accessible to existing scripts but not be accessible to new scripts. So make sure you take a look at that and see if there's any transition you have to do for your existing guys.
That's great. Yeah, and just to be clear, because we have had a little bit of confusion, UI app, the UI service as a whole is not going anywhere.
That's right.
A few small parts that were kind of sitting in the corner unused, those are being cleaned away, but the whole of it is staying there. Feel free to continue to use UI app.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
Sometimes recommend people to look to HTML service if you've never really given it a shot. We think it has some nice benefits, but UI app will remain, so rest assured. Another bit of news, we had another blog post about Hack to School.
Yeah.
So this was great. One of our colleagues, Arun, who you've probably seen on these programs that we've done many times, he helped participate in an event here in the New York City area that...
I don't know if we call New Jersey the New York City area.
The metro area. And that was held and it invited both coders and teachers to come together to create solutions for education, right? So teachers and administrators have a lot of problems that they deal with. It's a very complex working environment. And they a lot of times utilize Google Apps to kind of handle this, spreadsheets and pass data around, and it's really quite useful. But with Google Apps Script, they can get a little bit further and make these systems that they build that much more powerful. And so this was a really great event where they got people together, made it a competition, and I think came up with some good results.
Yeah. It's really amazing how widely the education community has embraced AppScript. It's, I think, an accident on our part. It's not like AppScript is really tailored for that use case, but just as it has, I think we often think of our sort of main users being like businesses and enterprise kind of workflow guys, but in some ways education users have that that constraint even magnified, because you get really very different classes of users between the sort of administrator teacher and the students you're delegating to, and it's really interesting. And I mean, there's also the fact that we're free.
Yeah, being free always helps.
Always helps in education. Yeah.
So check out that blog post. There's some really cool stuff that they came up with, and if you're interested in hacking for education, I'm sure they could use some more volunteers.
Yeah.
So reach out there. All right, well, now we've got through some of the news. Let's jump into release notes, which is our last little bit of news. As you know, we put out release notes for every little AppScript release. The releases kind of roll out in the background. There's no big version numbers. You don't actually see them happening, but
we'd be at a very, very high version number if we did.
We would. But when the releases do come out, we create documentation around what changed. And I think since our last Google Apps Unscripted, hasn't been a terrible amount of change. As you can see on the 18th, we made a small change to the UI where the action publish to gallery is now called submit to gallery. Yeah. So we have a script gallery that allows people to take a spreadsheet script and stick it in a place where other people can download it and use it, right? Kind of a sharing mechanism. We just want to make sure people didn't confuse that with publish as a web app, since that's kind of a completely different flow. So that was one small change we made. And then more recently, we did a couple bug fixes you can see here. One of the ones of interest is range.merge across and merge vertically. There's different ways to merge cells in a spreadsheet, and we had these 3 methods, and they didn't quite work quite right. I think they kind of overlapped in behavior.
Yeah.
It's all sorted out now, though, right?
Yep.
All right.
I've tested it. It's just like you'd expect. It's one of those things you get a release note. It's like, this now works correctly. Yeah. What more is there to say?
Well, that's what it's meant for.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some release notes. So that's about it as far as news goes. So we're really interested in seeing if anybody in the Hangout has any questions. Let's jump in. Do we have any Hangout participants with questions for us?
Hey, look, our friends. Do we have any volume?
I got one question.
Yeah, hi.
Yep. Hello, my name is Harry Oosterveen from Netherlands.
Yeah, hi Harry.
Hi. A while ago I wanted to share spreadsheet script via the gallery, but I noted that it was only possible with a personal account and not with a Google Apps account. Is that still the case, or has that changed?
Yes, I believe that still is the case. There was, I think it's a limitation that they didn't, I don't know if it's across the board or if it's a domain-specific setting, but that, I guess there was some concern that you may write a script that is internal information and that you accidentally share it to the public without realizing it, right. And how that could, be somewhat damaging. So I think it's kind of a safety mechanism that you cannot submit to the gallery from one of your, domain accounts.
You've discovered the workaround, thankfully, all on your own.
Yeah. So yeah, we do have some people who, when they want to share a script, will do it from a separate personal account, and that's probably the best thing you could do right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Harry.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions live via the Hangout?
Yes, David French. I have an issue that I want to separate my user interface from the back end or the service, I think you'd probably call it, and looking at using the content service and JSON-P. I got to the point where you get a terrible warning saying if you do this, you're going to expose yourself to spoofing attacks and things like that. I understand that. Mm-hmm. I wonder, there are obviously ways to get a bit of protection here, and I wondered whether you have a general guide to doing that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I saw your question pop up in the moderator before. So yeah, as he was mentioning, we have a warning in our content service documentation about how when you use a JSON-P service or set up content service to act as a JSON-P service, there's a little bit of danger in that you are taking maybe if you publish a script to run as you, right, and now you're making it accessible via just a JavaScript include, you're potentially allowing other people to access your data because that script, there's no authentication mechanism built into the content service and being able to ask people to authenticate. So because of that, if you open it up publicly so anybody can use it, then someone else could look at your web page code, take that same bit of script, and then all of a sudden access your data on their own web page. So there's a little bit of danger there. There is no right now way to do it in a authenticated way. We don't have quite the mechanism set up for that. So using the content service with JSON-P is possible, but I would say
you want to be careful essentially what type of data you expose to it. Certain types of things you're going to be okay with, others not so much.
Yeah.
It's really the sort of thing where the developer wants to make a sanity check against what kinds of data they're exposing.
Right. Does that help? Or are there other questions around that?
Well, not really. You do provide the authentication if you run as if you're looking at it running within the domain, if you like. What I was looking for was something that would actually support, a secondary authentication, like your standard mechanism with two-phase, getting an SMS message, for instance, when you log on. If you did that at the application level and stored that as a cookie, that would provide that anti-spoofing mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably some things that we could do on the product side to make this kind of more robust and better meet your needs. I don't think that's anywhere, you're not going to see that in the near term. If there's something that you can code up that you think will help with your authentication and security issues, that's fine. But as far as like a product feature, I don't think you're going to see that in the near term. So, I would say, feel free to use JSON-P for certain use cases, but I think maybe for others, a different integration mechanism might be the better way to go about.
Okay, what would that be?
Well, so it kind of depends. So you mentioned like wanting to separate your UI from your backend. I mean, like we're working on kind of improving our HTML service documentation. We have different people in our team working on creating some new samples. And if you've used the HTML service, it actually has a really nice library built into it so that when you're in the front end of your application, the HTML JavaScript that's running client side, you can call google.script.run, and it does an RPC call back to the back end, does some processing, and gets the result, and then you can display it via jQuery or some other library. So I find the separation there is actually really nice, where the HTML service page that you serve it to the user is really kind of just mostly focused on the UI and handling the data, and then your backend, GS file AppScript code is focused purely on doing some processing.
Yeah, and you can sort of strictly control what functions are accessible to google.script.run, and it'll only run. That code will only run while you're on script.google.com. It's a really nice sandboxing, and it takes care of most of it for you. Yeah.
So I would say you can use JSON-P as a tool, but as more of a solution, I think HTML service is probably there as like a better solution.
Okay.
Great. Other questions live before we jump into the moderator?
Sounds like a no.
All right, that's a no. All right, well, let's keep going on the moderator then. So we have some questions here on the moderator. We'll take a look. So one of the first ones here is short-term rate limits on JDBC calls. And then is there a difference if you're using our regular JDBC connector versus the Cloud SQL connector? And can we increase them? So if you go to the URL script.google.com/dashboard, this is where we will display, first of all, whether we have any sort of outages that we know about, but also a lot of our quotas. And so the only restriction I could find on JDBC are these two here, which is how many connections you can make on a per-day basis. Now there also are, I'd see there's like some shorter term limits. So I think it's like 1 connection per second. So if you open a connection, you can do a lot of work within that connection, and I don't think you're going to run into any problems there. But it does seem like you want to not open lots and lots of connections. So open a connection, get one field, close it. Open another connection, get one field, close it, right? Yeah. If you keep it open, I think you probably won't run into the 1 second limit, and I'd also be surprised if you ran into 10,000 a day. So take a look at those limits. If for whatever reason you have a use case that it's really important and one of these numbers is holding you up, file something in our issue tracker and we can take a look and see if we can change it. But for the most part, I think those are probably in line. And if you just don't open too many connections, you'll be OK. Yeah. So the next one we have here, that's a JSON-P that we already talked about. Let's talk about the HTML service then from Antonoli. I don't know if I said that right. So it lots a lot of questions packed into one here, right? We're asking about keyboard events, disabling the right click, opening up new windows, setting fixed element position, right? there's probably a lot of different answers because there's a lot of different questions. One of the things about HTML service, I guess, just to set the board, is that you are using kind of like, for the most part, standard HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. The only limitation is that we kind of put a little layer in between what you write and what the user gets for safety. So you'll notice that your web apps, if served off of HTML service, serve off of script.google.com. Google.com, that little part of the URL, has a lot of power. And so we need to be extra careful that we don't let things through that can be damaging. So we use a sanitization engine called Kaha that we've talked about before on this program that'll go in and make sure that what you're doing isn't dangerous, that you're not accessing anything you shouldn't access, you're not breaking out of places you shouldn't break out of. So that engine today does create some weird limitations. I know, Dan, you've looked a lot into the Kaha world, and there's definitely some things that today you can't do.
Yeah.
I know there's stuff about setting code directly in your HTML. I think they usually want it not attached to the HTML element. Yeah. So there are some limitations, and we're working better right now. We actually have a project underway that should make this a lot easier, and hopefully I'll be able to show you that soon. But for the meantime, for the most part, the way you would do something in AppScript HTML service is the way you would do it in any HTML. Really,
the rule of thumb right now is try to do it the normal way. If it doesn't work in the normal way, occasionally there's a workaround. For the most part, if it doesn't work, that's because Kaha is getting in the way. If you sort of, pop open your browser's inspection panel and see if you're getting any console log warnings, or see if you can see how how Kaha has rewritten your page, you might be able to find the source of the bug and work around that. But a lot of the times, really the advice is try to do it the normal way. If it doesn't work, it might not work for now until we get these improvements to the way that Kaha and HTML service integrate that Eric's talking about. And more news on that for you hopefully soon.
Yeah. So and the thing is, why you run into these problems with Kaha is that Kaha is very strict, right? There's the JavaScript specification, the ECMA specification, and it goes by the book. And it turns out that a lot of browsers are really loose. They'll allow pretty much anything through as long as it's close. And so because of that, some code that may have worked in a browser that someone posted on Stack Overflow or some other forum that says, here's a solution, that may not work by the strict rules of the specification. And so a lot of times you'll be running into that problem where we're just being more strict on code than a browser normally would be.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question related to that?
Sure.
Yes.
Until now, I mainly used the UI app, but the HTML service looks quite promising. But I understood it's using HTML4. Can I also use it with HTML5 and Bootstrap, for example?
Yes, Bootstrap is a popular request.
Yeah, it can use certain elements of HTML5. I believe if you actually take a look at the code or at the page that's served, it is actually technically an HTML5 doc type. We sort of describe it as HTML4-like today because it, although serving an HTML5 page removes a lot of the APIs that are available, exclusively in HTML5, your web workers and local storage, that kind of thing. But for the most part, your HTML5 elements should be available, accessible, and they should work as you would expect them to work in HTML5.
Okay.
So, for example, I think you can use the canvas element, which is an HTML5 thing. It's been around in HTML service for a while. To be honest, one of the problems with using HTML service these days is the documentation is a little bit disorganized. We have a new version of that that's almost ready to go, and if you've got a project where you think HTML service would be really good right now, we all learned it from the existing documentation, but it was a bit of a pain. You can do that. But if you can wait a few weeks, if it's just a sort of experimental project where you're waiting, then maybe we can get you some new, cleaner documentation soon.
I'm curious to give it a try before that.
Okay, yeah. Just it's all there. All the information's there. It's just you'll be jumping around a bit. That's all.
Yeah. And for Bootstrap in particular, I know people have been asking for it, and we're going to make a stronger effort in the future to kind of take these kind of high-profile, critical libraries and setups and make sure that they work, right?
Yeah.
Because it seems like a lot of people they want Bootstrap for the beginning. They don't want to have to fiddle around.
Yeah. jQuery, for example, is very popular with HTML service. It's extensively tested. We ensure that both jQuery and jQuery UI work right out of the box.
Right.
Yeah, if you take a look, there's actually some canonical links for jQuery and jQuery UI that will that are listed in our HTML service documentation. That'll speed up your app a bit.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. Any other live questions while we're here in the Hangout?
Back to the moderator.
All right, off we go. Feel free to chime in later. So the next one here we have is it possible to use the and or just ampersand, and pipe operators as and or in Google Apps Script? I've tried to do it and I can't make it work when I find a documentation. Well, you can. So Google Apps Script at its core is just JavaScript.
Yeah.
And
And JavaScript at its core is just ECMAScript.
Yeah, exactly.
It goes all the way
down. And so yes, because JavaScript supports these, they work in AppScript. I unfortunately I don't know why you were having problems with it, but do some more testing, try it out. Sometimes when I'm testing things, I'll actually try to run the code in my browser first.
Yeah, exactly.
So like Google Chrome, the browser has a great little console where you can type in JavaScript code and see it run. It's a really fast way to kind of like see whether or not a piece of code runs.
Yeah.
And so try some stuff out there, but yeah, in general, anything that's part of JavaScript or ECMAScript should work just fine. Great. Last one, I've got a couple more here. Are there any plans to allow set page level permissions for sites? Page level permissions. Yes, I think there is a feature request for this in our issue tracker. The feature is that Google Sites, you can either set permissions on the whole site or you can enable per page permissions. And currently in AppScript, we don't expose those per page permission settings, but I understand that they are popular. So that's, I think there's an open issue for that.
The team. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you lodge your interest there, that'll help us kind of better prioritize it.
One thing that we say almost every time in Apps Unscripted here is when you got a feature request, please file it in our issue tracker. And if you see an existing feature request that you think would be really useful for you, make sure to add a little star next to it. That's really what we use as our priority list for community requested feature development. If you look back in the release notes a couple weeks, there was one week we had a spate of new features that we added that were pretty much all community requests.
Yeah.
Someone on the team finished up a little project they were working on and got really excited to address some of those pending things.
That's great.
So we have a lot of users. We can't address everybody's requests. We just don't have enough engineering time, and the product would grow to be sort of unwieldily large. That's not a word, but but we do take a look at everything that comes in and prioritize them based on the community votes they get. So get out there and tell us what you want.
Sounds great. Yeah, I mean, it's good for you. It's good for us. Everybody wins.
Yeah. One of the funny things about AppScript I always say is that we're always really surprised at the things that people are doing with it. For example, the popularity of AppScript in education. And the things that we find people are doing from looking at Stack Overflow or our issue tracker sometimes diverge from what we thought people would use features for. And the only way we can learn about those is for you to tell us.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so we're just about out of time. Let's address one more question here that has some votes, which is someone saying, it just popped up. I lost it. I'm terribly disappointed by the decision to discontinue UI Builder. Do you have any plans to replace it with a drag and drop UI Builder for HTML service? There are some good ones out there, but can something that integrates with Google Apps Script be good? Yeah, I mean, I've actually heard some other people already request this kind of, and I think we're going to start testing out whether some of those ones will work with HTML service. I think in general, we might lean to a solution where we'll ask you to, we'll recommend or ask you to use another drag and drop HTML service and then bring that into Google Apps Script. Mm-hmm. It may not be just built into the UI as it was before, but we're trying to make more and more HTML service behave like normal HTML.
Yeah.
So if you can find a tool that works on normal HTML, we want to support that. And I think that could be a great way to kind of get some of the same features of GUI Builder, but now using HTML service. If we can find a popular one, ensure that it works, and make sure that our HTML service just behaves like normal HTML.
That'd be great.
All right, well, that's about it. That's all the time we have for this episode of Apps Unscripted. Thanks, everyone who joined us live and asked questions. Thanks for watching us live on YouTube, and this recording will be available shortly for anyone who missed it. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Eric. Thanks,
and
everybody.
We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Good talking to you.